Now we're going to talk about twin air products. We're going to be using the twin air filter on our Yamaha 450, and we're also going to be using the twin air oil cooler that Twin Air has available. Come to find out, not too many people know that Twin Air has an oil cooler. They've been making it for the last few years, but it doesn't seem like many riders in the US use this product. I'm a huge fan of oil coolers. My whole thinking is bringing the core temperature down of the engine and makes your bike run better, run longer. You can make modifications to it and keeping the core temperature down. Anyway, let's look at the features of the Twin Air oil cooler. The oil cooler itself is a pretty heavy duty piece. It mounts on the back side of the radiators, the engine side of the radiators, and it mounts directly to the standard mounts that you have. They make them for all brands, and it's a really nice piece. The oil cooler also comes with hose that goes down to your engine where you're going to mount it up. It comes with a new oil cover that, well, you're going to need it if you have an oil cooler. And it has its two spigots in and out, obviously. You're going to have to run a different oil filter, but the whole package comes with an oil filter, and it has a couple little other pieces that you may not have ever seen, but the instructions actually to mounting this and putting it together, it's pretty in-depth. It's something that you can do in your garage, and it's a pretty simple task, I feel. We're going to do it down in our shop, and we're going to show you how to do it. So I think we'll maybe find some shortcuts. You never know. I mean, the way the instructions go, they're pretty good. Obviously, there's some clamps for your hose. And then trust the old zip ties. Don't leave home without them. Always need zip ties. Now let's talk about our Twin Air air filter. Twin Air has always made great products. They make great filters. The Yamaha, with the way that the engine's turned around the other way, there are air boxes on the front. So it's a little bit different, but Twin Air stepped up. They changed this bottom foam to a little more dense foam. It does rub on the airbox a little bit on the motorcycle, and they don't want to have the dirt rubbing itself through the filter. And then the rest of the filter is obviously fairly similar to the normal Twin Air filter. It's 3 different foams, and I think they did a really good job. Now we're in the shop. We're going to install the Twin Air oil cooler. I think it's going to be a fairly straightforward install. We'll know more once we get into it. The product is pretty clean and has all the brackets already mounted onto the radiator part of it. And so we're going to get to it and cross every hurdle we can and see how it goes. So it should be fun. First thing we're going to do, and you may or may not have to do this, we're going to do it because it's the first time we're going to install the oil cooler. We're going to drain the radiator fluid out of the motorcycle so that we can take the radiator hoses off and just make sure our fitment is correct. So the first thing we're going to do is crack the drain for the coolant and try to catch as much as we can of it. Need to crack the cap loose to let some air get in there, and then we'll spill it all over the place. I always lean the bike over when I drain the fluid just to try to get every little bit out. It's not that important, but I like to get as much out as possible. Replace the bolt, and you want to give it a snug, tighten it up, because a lot of people do forget to tighten that bolt up. Since we're going to be working in this area of the motorcycle, we're going to try to peel some of this plastic off and some of these parts and whatnot. So first things first, we need to get this lower radiator shroud off, and we have to pull the seat off to get that off. Okay, and then you can just pull it straight down and your lower louver is off. Now we're going to have to remove this louver that sits on the front of the radiator. It's just held on by 2 bolts. We've got the Dr. D radiator lowering kit on, so that's what these red pieces are, but they all come off in one bit. Now we're going to want to take the radiator off. The radiator is held on by these 2 bolts in the front. Without the louver, you can get straight to these bolts. And again, we have the Dr. D lowering kit on, so that's what these red brackets are for. We're going to take the bottom radiator hose off just to allow us to be able to move this radiator in and out all around. And this is held on by 2 hose clamps, and pretty simple to get off. You could use a Phillips screwdriver, or like what I'm doing, use a 6 socket. All comes off the radiator, and then we will take the clamps off and pull that little hose off. Next, you're going to want to take the lower rubber grommet out of this radiator mount here. You need to push this hat washer out, and then pull your grommet out. As I said earlier, the twin air oil cooler radiator has nice brackets that fit directly onto the bottom of your radiator, and you would want to slide that on from the back side, get it in place, line it up with the holes that are on the radiator. Now we're going to push the grommet, make sure that it's lined up. There's 2 large holes, and the grommet is going to just push back into place. But going through both holes, and you probably need a screwdriver for this one to be able to get it pushed into place. There you go. Now that we have our grommet back in place, you want to slide your hat washer back in, line it up with the holes, and then put your bolts back into place and tighten them down. Next, you're going to want to replace the plastic louver that goes on the front side of the radiator. We're just going to have to line up the hole that we have here, and since we're using the Dubach radiator lowering pieces, they fit in there pretty straightforward. Just line everything up. We're going to want to put our bolts back into our plastic louver. We already have it in place, and we have our Dubach lowering pieces on here. You just want to get your bolts started first, maybe snug it up a little bit, and then go to the top one and do the same with the top. Just get it kind of snugged up, because we're going to have to rotate these pieces to the top side, and then you can give them a tighten. Now, as you can see, we had to lay the motorcycle down on its side to take the oil filter cover off and replace it with the twin air oil cooler oil filter cover. So we just do this to let the oil settle down into the ignition side of the engine, just to allow us to change this without draining all the oil out. You can drain the oil and leave your bike sitting straight up on the stand, but since we have fresh oil in here and no need to change it, we're just going to do it like this. Quick, easy 2 bolts. You might have a little seepage of oil come out, even laying on its side. Don't worry about that. You're not going to lose very much. Have a rag on hand just in case. And you want to take your standard oil filter out. Now we have our twin air oil filter and our twin air oil filter cover as one piece, but we're going to pull it apart and put it in individually just to make sure we don't miss anything. We're going to slip our little adapter in there first and settle it at the bottom. Then you can slide your oil filter, get it centered. Now on the inside of the twin air oil filter cover, there is a little indentation where the O-ring goes. I put a little bit of grease in there just to hold the O-ring in place, that when we are putting it on, it doesn't dislodge and get out of place. So just set it in there with a little bit of grease, and I'm talking just a little bit. And then you're able to spin it over and turn it around and the O-ring sticks. And we'll put that right in place. Man, that looks good. Okay. Now we can replace our bolts. Just drop them in. Make sure the holes are lined up. And we'll tighten them down. Don't over tighten one, just snug the first one up. Doesn't matter if you go top or bottom, and just get it to set in, because it does have an O-ring in there. Don't over tighten these. You might want to refer to your torque spec in your manual for the torque of these bolts. Your twin air oil cooler comes with a solid rubber hose that it's your lines from your cooler to your cover. But what I did, I cut them in half because we're going to need 2. So just go ahead and slice it in half, just 50-50. We're going to put our clamp onto one side of one of the rubber hoses, and you could do that with a pair of pliers or dikes, something to get a hold of it and put it together. Now that we have our hose clamp in place, we can put it up right there to its position, push on the hose clamp again, and push it up and it's supposed to be. And then you can just get your hose clamp in place. You might want to adjust it just to keep those pieces away from the radiator. You don't want them digging in on it. Now that we have our hose cut, we're going to want to put our clamp on. Again, we're just going to slide it on the hose first. Now we need to work the clamp down into its position. You need to push it together with your pliers, and you need to walk it down. Sometimes it's not as easy as you think, but you can get it with a little bit of time. Take your time on it. And there it's in place. Now we're going to do the same thing with the other hose. We need to get the clamp into place on this top of the hose. And again, we're going to slide it on and slide it into its position. Then get your pliers like we did before and just work it into its spot. Again, take your time, no rush here. And there we go. Now we're going to do the same thing with the other hose. Real quickly, just to explain why we put the hoses the way we did, routed them to certain inserts. This is inlet. You want it to circulate. So this is the inlet to the radiator. This is the exit of the oil on the back side. And then it comes into the inlet and then the out inlet. So your oil will be circulating this way through your radiator. So you don't want to get these mixed up or whatever. You want to do it exactly the way the instructions said, so your oil will be circulating. Now we're going to finish off the hoses with the zip tie. The kit comes with three or four zip ties. We're going to use one of them. And everyone's going to have their own way that they like to do it. So I'm just showing you the way I would do it. And I am going to try to get it away from the exhaust a little bit. Get them lined up. Snip it. And then I always like to rotate it to the back side. We've sat the motorcycle back up on the stand and upright. We need to increase the oil, the amount of oil in the cases, since we've increased the volume now by adding the hoses and the radiator, the oil cooler radiator. So all you need to do is actually take your oil plug out. Need to add 150 milliliters. Now that we have our oil cooler, radiator, hoses, filter cap, everything in place, all we need to do is replace the bottom radiator hose, and we will do that by slipping this on, putting our clamps in place, putting the other clamp on and sliding it to the top. Ready to be tightened down. Now that we have our hose, radiator hose in place, all we got to do is tighten our clamps down. Don't over tighten these. Definitely take your time, snug them up. Now that we had put everything back into place, put the oil back in, raise the level 150 milliliters from what standard is. We ran the motorcycle, let it idle for 2 minutes, and then we need to check to make sure that there's no air pockets in our radiator. We're going to have to loosen this vent hole on the top to make sure that the oil has circulated through the oil cooler radiator. So you just want to crack it loose, work it out a little bit, a couple threads, and you'll see the oil dripping out, and just tighten it back up. Now we're going to replace our OE plastic. We're going to put the lower radiator shroud back in place. And if you pop that little piece into the rubber grommet in front, clip it under the air box, we can get some bolts started in here. And last but not least, we'll put our seat back into place. Try to get her lined up straight. Check to make sure that it's in the right position. Holes are lined up. So we just finished putting the twin air oil cooler on. It was a pretty simple task. One thing that I want to stress is when you bleed the system after you idle the bike for 2 minutes, make sure that system is full of oil. That was the only thing that I felt was maybe a sensitive area to the whole install. Everything else was pretty straightforward, bolt on, getting your lines cut to the right length. Everything was really easy. Just bleeding the system and making sure that it's full of oil, that was the biggest issue that I saw with the whole install. It's simple, just make sure that you take your time in that area and get the system bled correctly. Other than that, it was a simple task, and thanks for joining us. Don't forget, there are 3 ways that you can order here at Chaparral. You can call our 800 number, which is 800-841-2960. Go to our website, shapmoto.com, or just come on into our store and you'll be able to order whatever you need.